Heading into remote areas of South Africa can be one of the most rewarding adventures you'll ever experience, but it can also expose you to additional risks. In this episode, Walter Meyer from Wild Medics shares lessons from his recent off-road driving tour through Namaqualand, covering communications, hydration, medical preparedness, vehicle planning, and what it really takes to travel safely when help may be hours away. Walt, good early morning and welcome back.
Good morning, Rayan. Good to see you again.
So before we get into the trip itself, can you maybe just give us and the readers some context? Where did you travel? How remote were some of the areas? What were the biggest risks that you identified during the planning phase?
Yeah, so around this one for me was interesting. I didn't really plan the trip so much. I was invited by some friends to join them on a trip that they had planned. They had also done this thing before, so for them it wasn't so new. So that helped. And in typical Walt fashion, I only arrived back from an upcountry training trip the night before. So I had to plan and pack and everything for this thing in something like 6 hours and try and get some sleep. But it's yeah, basically the trip that we did was this it's called, I think, the Namaqualand 4x4 trail, eco trail. Um, it's fairly easy in terms of a four-wheel driving and so forth. But it is quite remote. It's against the Orange River in the Northern Cape. So you start there from Pella, which is a beautiful little. It's one of those old missionary towns, and then you basically travel along the river. You see little settlements along the way, but you don't really go through any other towns for several days. And then you come out somewhere between Vioolsdrift and Springbok on excuse me, on the N7 there. So yeah, it is an interesting one because in a way you feel like you're close to certain places if you're a few hundred kilometers from big centers, but you quickly realize how remote it becomes if things are slow and the terrain is rough and so forth. And there's a difference between along the road and driving time and as the crow flies. The crow is always faster. So I think one needs to not look at that so much as look at how long it will actually take you to fly rather than the crow to fly. But yeah, very, very beautiful area, fantastic. Also very good, I think, an introductory area for people who've not done things like this before and who are keen to experience that kind of overlanding or overlanding adventures and so forth. The couple who organized it actually had their two sons who are just now sort of the age where they start driving and so forth. They were driving along in one of the Suzuki Jimneys, and
Okay.
getting taught by dad how to do things and so forth, which was awesome. Very, very fantastic thing to see and experience. But yeah, great introductory trip, I think, for like either for younger people or for
Okay.
inexperienced off-roaders. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, you, as a matter of of course, with your work, you drive all over the country basically all the time. So I know you are uh, prepared for pretty much anything, I think, at any stage, in terms of what could happen. So I think 6 hours in your specific case was probably enough, um, to
Yeah.
get things done. It might not be the same for most other people, though, who only do things like this on an irregular basis. So let's jump to communications first. Um, Far from towns, probably bad cellular coverage, if any. What did you guys do as for communication for this trip? What equipment did you carry? How did you ensure that somebody would know if something went wrong?
Yeah, I think so. So firstly, between the vehicles, communication is quite important, or well, it's helpful. It also means you don't always have to stay in sight of each other. So, like my wife likes to stop and get out and take 17 million photos of, the eye of a puff adder or something like that. And so
Yes.
I
And
tend to
he's not
often,
joking about that.
I tend to often be delayed a bit, so, uh, and that makes it, it makes it good to have some comms between the vehicles. So interesting thing there is uh, the the organizer had some of the small two-way radios that one can purchase at most outdoor stores and at the Corporatie and all these places. It's things like Zartec and Motorola and whatever. There are a whole bunch of brand names. Um, I think they're 0.5 kilowatt radios. It's the unlicensed ones
Yes.
that you can just go and purchase. And interesting with that is it's nice to test stuff like that. And from, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat here, but from the front vehicle to the rear vehicle, often you cannot receive comms with those, even in a fairly flat area. And it actually shows you the limitations of those things. So it is also quite important, if you go buy something like that, I think, is to understand what it can and can't do. And it's not a professional two-way radio. One has to understand that. So in my vehicle, I've got a built-in radio, and then so that's the one that's in a console that's fitted to the vehicle. Okay, so those
Yes.
are normally they're about 25 kilowatts. It gives you a very big broadcast range, but of course that's a licensed thing, or the channels are licensed. So you need you can't just go and buy it and stick it in. You have to have your own channel or somebody else's channel that you can use with permission and so forth. And then I have some portable radios, which are the professional level ones, which are the 5 kilowatt ones, right? For instance, I gave a lead vehicle one of those so that we could also speak if I get too far behind when I just gone through 17 cameras already, and then, at least we can still speak to each other. But that's an important thing, I think, just to note, is if on those commercially available little ones, they're very seriously limited. They're useful, absolutely, but limited in where and how far you can receive. And also between the different models. If the really tiny one is very limited, the larger ones with a longer aerial, of course, gives you bigger range. Benefits of having those things is that um, they are in so much use in South Africa that even sometimes security companies have them. People who you would expect would have licensed radios, they often use those open channel radios. A lot of farming operations use them, and so on. So your chance of that radio, if there's any kind of life in 2 to 5 kilometers around you, you might pick up somebody by accident on those things, if that makes sense. Whereas
Yes.
obviously on a licensed radio channel, it's highly unlikely, although it is possible because they do give the same frequency in different areas. So I might because I'm normally, say, Cape Town based, my office is in Cape Town, my frequency may be repeated somewhere else. Okay, but it's highly unlikely that that you're just by chance going to pick up some guy who happens to have the same frequency as you. But with those little radios, you often do pick up other people. So you might pick up, say, farm workers speaking to each other or whatever. So in an emergency, it could be useful because you can switch your radio to scan, right? And you can scan all
Oh,
the
yeah.
channels that's on there. Or you may pick up another party who's overlanding, because there are other groups on a trail like that, especially in school holidays like we were in now and so on. There were actually a fair amount of other groups there. So maybe if you're in an emergency, by luck, you can pick up somebody else with one of those things. So that's a definite positive of those radios. Okay, and then in terms of communication to the outside world, um, what was in the party, as far as I know, was some people had these Garmin, what do they call them, inReaches, where it's a thing where you can connect your cell phone with an app, and then you can speak to the outside world. And
Yes.
then I still have a traditional satellite phone as well as a Garmin inReach. So we had all those tools available. Of course, I actually prefer to keep those things off when you're doing that. You'll switch them on if you need them. I don't want to hear from anybody outside the world when I'm in
No, of course, that makes sense. Yes.
in the
I mean,
bush. And
that's the whole
when
idea.
yeah, when I take my holiday that comes up every 25 years. I really don't want to hear from anybody, but yeah, those were the tools that we had available. I think also something that is quite obvious now is that those type of tools are becoming more affordable and more available to the average user. Whereas, if you look at the traditional satellite phone, for instance, it's an expensive thing to operate and to own and so forth. And unless you have a professional use for it, it's generally a bit over the top, for once a year type use.
Yeah, it's a pity it's not Starlink. Oh, wait. Uh, Hydration and food. I mean, these things are often underestimated. It seems simple. Um, how did you guys go about ensuring that your water, your hydration, water and food requirements are on are on par, and that nobody would go hungry, and that you have enough of everything? Did you build in some contingencies? Did your real world consumption match your planning with that?
Yeah, so that is an interesting thing to look at. So look, because there were a number of vehicles in the party, some of the people carry quite large containers and things like, they've got tanks that are fits on a vehicle roof. Some of the one guy was towing one of those off-road trailers that has a water tank built into it, which is quite cool to see. And it depends obviously on your party size. Look, so we each vehicle just catered for itself in our case now. Um, so just being my wife and myself in the vehicle, and we're uh, obviously quite experienced outdoors people. I spent, I think, more time outdoors maybe than indoors, but so we're actually light on things like that. And both of us, what was interesting that we saw is both I and myself come from predominantly a mountaineering and hiking background in terms of outdoors. Um, and you can take a lot more luxuries, of course, when you're in a vehicle.
Yeah.
So we tend to pack like hikers instead of like overlanders. And when you look at the guys packing like overlanders, you go, geez, that's nice. I should do that as well. So, there's amazing stuff available for it. But so in water terms, what is interesting there is so this trip follows the Orange River essentially. Okay, so you can imagine it's almost like one of those whitewater river trips that you sign up for, except this is not guided, right? This is self-guided, and so you do your own thing and you carry all your own equipment and so on. But essentially, you follow the river. So, in the one hand, a person tends to think, oh, well, there's water all the time. But then you've got to consider that you can't really just drink that water straight out of the river. I mean, in certain areas you probably can, and that's probably something which one could argue. But I'm cautious of drinking the river water there in the Orange River, especially because of the amount of people that travel around there. Also, there are lots of farming settlements and things. So you don't always know what's in the water. I mean, it's fine to swim in. It's fine to take some water out and go wash your dishes with and that type of thing. But I wouldn't consume it in any large amount. So you need to carry fresh water. You'll see even the guys who do the river trips and so on, they carry big cans of water down the river for the people, or and where they have vehicle access, they drop cans for the groups to use. So yeah, you've got to kind of uh, figure out how much you need per person per day. Not just for drinking, but for obviously for cooking. Decide whether you're happy to clean using the river water or not. So some guys also like to do these things like they have shower setups and things like that, that then requires a lot more water feed from a vehicle. which in my case, I don't have stuff like that. I just go wash at the river or whatever, so take some water, which was fresh, by the way. It's not. You would
I
have
can
liked it.
imagine.
Actually, I said to Ida a couple of times, Rian would have liked it. For him, it would have been Durban beach water. He's used to lying in his ice baths, but it is, yeah, uh, so it depends how you operate like that. We took a bunch of I just, because we were in such a hurry on the way to plan, I didn't take jerry cans and stuff. I just bought a stack of those big 5 liter spring
Oh, yes.
waters, and I took those along. So yeah, I think we had about 40 liters of that, and that was plenty for us for the 4 days, for just for Ida and myself. Um, and yeah, we had left when we came out, which is fine. I think if you now get stuck there or something like that, obviously you're going to consume more.
Yeah.
Um, or if you have something like an injury that you have to clean or whatever, you might consume more. But in the group, there was plenty of water. But yeah, that's basically what most of the people carried water. I think the next option would be to try and purify water. So I normally carry means to purify water as well. So even if I'm not planning on using it, I have it available. If something happens and I need more water, I can. And there are various purification methods available, for that. So anything from filters to tablets and so forth. That's obviously quite a big topic. We can talk about that maybe on another day if you want. But it's yeah, there are various methods available for that. So yeah, that's the backup that I normally have. Of
Perfect.
course, there's also good old boiling of the water, right? If you need to, if I had to
Of
consume
course.
that river water, I would definitely boil it, beforehand, and then just use some sort of a pre-filter to take anything out that might be in there that's more like solid particles and so on.
Yeah. No, well, boiling in a case like that is just, you have to.
Mhm.
You're a wilderness and emergency medical practitioner, so I imagine that for any such a trip, your medical prep tends to look a little bit different from the average travelers. Um, what sort of medical equipment do you yourself carry? Were you uh, prepping with something specific in mind? And then also, how much medical capability should the average off-roader realistically have?
Yeah, it is one of those things that's kind of, the more you know and the more you learn, the more paranoid you become and the more of the stuff you carry. Um, I guess it's yeah, so I take obviously my normal trauma equipment and so on, which we've discussed before, and I have an AED, which is the automated defibrillator. So in case somebody had a heart attack or something like that, you could utilize that. And then the thing that I expand on generally on trips like this is it's actually more the less exciting stuff. People like to talk about tourniquets and wound packing and all of that stuff, but it's the medication ranges that you need. It's things like to fight diarrhea, fight vomiting, fight dehydration, and so forth. We were fortunate on this trip. We hardly used any first aid equipment. I think up to the last day, I gave somebody some, anti-diarrhea medication or something, and that was about as exciting as the medicine got. But of course, the interesting thing with something like that, though, is people underestimate that especially in a camp setting. If you've got one guy who gets sick and he gets diarrhea, very soon you're going to have other people with the same problem. So it can get out of hand super, super fast. And I've seen that. And once it's out of hand, of course, it's a nightmare. So I
Yes.
normally carry obviously IV fluids and things like that as well. So I had some of that. I think the risk with this stuff is you tend to go and, oh my word, how many bags of this stuff need I pack? And if everybody gets sick and then you end up with 2 cases of IV fluids with you, you can get out of hand with that. So you almost have to tell yourself, like, wait, hang on a second, I'm not going to war here, I'm going on holiday.
Yeah.
Um, so in a way, I think the other thing for me, of course, that's interesting is carrying things for what I might encounter along the way. You know, a lot of Murphy's Law says that I'm going to run into something to deal with, and I often do. Just because of driving all these weird distances and places, and especially back roads and so forth, coming across motor vehicle accidents and so on. And so I often carry equipment for that as well, because actually the road to it and the road back is more treacherous than the actual 4x4 trip route. By a long shot, it's more dangerous. So I carry more stuff for that, especially also because obviously in my case now my vehicle has got company branding and things on it and so on. So it's fairly clear, but it's a paramedical vehicle, and there's some expectation as well that you can
Yeah.
help, you know. And of course I want to, you know, it's my thing. So,
Well, I
so
mean,
I
yeah,
carry,
that's what
I
you do.
carry
But I mean,
equipment.
the typical person would now obviously not, but they need to be prepped for certain things. So I do think if you're doing this sort of off-roading stuff on a regular basis, I think it's good that you have done several medical type of first aid courses, and keep those up to date so that you can handle some things as you go along, because
Yeah.
somewhere something is going to happen.
I think it's sorry, you asked earlier about what should the average person carry.
Mm.
And I think it ties into that. Yeah, it doesn't help you carry a bunch of stuff you don't know how to use. Um, you know, medications and so on, you don't need a degree for that generally. It's fairly easy if you have, I'm talking about over-the-counter meds and so forth,
Mm.
you know, to figure those out when you need them and so forth. But um, yeah, it's important to pack stuff within your training and to get the training that goes with it, without a doubt. Now, it's interesting, this type of trip often shows you why things like wilderness medical training is useful, because it is not just the big stuff. You know, you go do your basic first aid course, and it's CPR and bleeding control and whatever, and that is hopefully on a trip like this not something that you're going to be using. You know, it's things like looking after a wound for 3 or 4 days because somebody cut their finger, or it's a guy who's getting diarrhea, or he's vomiting, or it's a guy who's got sunburn, or you know, it's those little things. But also some of it might not be deadly per se, but it spoils a trip very quickly if you don't know how to look after
Yes.
that. And it's, if you think about, I mean, you look at something like this, and it's an expensive thing to go on. So if you go and mess it up on day two because you can't, you know, you don't have an anti-diarrhea tablet or something, then and now you need to go home. It's a big disappointment.
Yeah, that's going to be shitty.
Exactly.
Vehicle problems. These can very quickly become people problems when you are hundreds of kilometers away from any assistance. How do you typically approach vehicle preparation and recovery equipment, fuel planning, route selections, to try and reduce the odds of becoming stranded?
Yeah, I think you've got to analyze the whole trip, you know, when you decide. So I carry a reasonable amount of that sort of, you know, get out of vehicle issue equipment with me all the time anyway, because it's also, you'll be surprised how many times you get asked things like, yeah, especially where, like I said, with a branded vehicle, how many people approach you and go, "Okay, oh, do you have jumper cables? Oh, do you have a tow rope?" You know, they come up to you and think, "Oh, somebody got injured," and go, "No, no, it's, you know, you're a paramedic. You must have, uh,
Yes.
you know, jumper leads. You know, it's like, because we put it, you know, like Mr. Bean on your nipples when we want to resuscitate you." But yeah, anyway, it's so I carry a fair amount of that stuff. I think the first thing is, on a trip like this, it's obviously beneficial not to be alone, so not to be one vehicle. I mean,
Sure.
you can. I like to do stuff alone as well, and so I'm sometimes tempted to do things which probably textbook you shouldn't do alone. But in this case, it's not just having somebody with you in the vehicle; it's having another vehicle at least, because there's a lot of safety in the second vehicle, third vehicle, fourth vehicle, and so on. Because also, if a vehicle gets stuck, for instance, or breaks down, you might require the other vehicle to get it out of the situation, right? So to recover it. Sometimes it's purely because you require an anchor point. For instance, if it helps you very little. You've got a winch on your vehicle, for instance, but you've got nothing to hook it onto. And in terrain, any terrain really, it's easy to be in a situation where there is just nothing to attach it to. So there's not another vehicle to create an anchor point. Your winch is pretty useless. Or you need to go and do something like create a dead man anchor, like, which is a mission and a half. That's like digging something into the sand to create an anchor, right? So, I mean, if I can avoid that, I would avoid making that. That sounds like effort on
Of
holiday.
course.
But
Yes.
and then you can obviously in the party discuss who's got what equipment and what can you carry. So things like sand tracks and tow ropes and do you need a kinetic strap and all of that sort of stuff. So you can figure that out. Often it's the little things. It's punctures, valve issues, being able to reinflate a tire, that type of thing. So that equipment plus, once again, the knowledge how to use it. The same with the recovery gear. The knowledge how to use it is quite important. Just look on the highway how many times you come past vehicles that are towing each other, and then the tow rope is attached to the trailer tow ball hitch of a vehicle, and that
I have
is
seen that.
it is
I have,
wildly dangerous, okay, because those things break off and
yeah.
then you've got a cannonball basically.
Mm.
Yeah, so and most people don't realize that. They think because that thing's designed to carry weight from the top, not to actually pull. People think it pulls, but it's a different thing. So it's not designed to tow, and it's definitely not designed to snatch on and snap vehicles out of danger and that sort of thing. So out of stuck positions and so on. So it's a common mistake to see that. Yeah, so knowing where to attach things also, a winch under tension, for instance, is quite a dangerous thing. If a cable snaps, it can take a leg off or cut a person open, that sort of thing. So where do people stand? What do they do? Anyway, so that is worth learning about, getting training in, or at least learning from a book how to do it and taking it in. But it's quite fun anyway to attend a training course for those things and to learn about it. But there's a lot involved in it.
Yeah.
And then
I
I've
think the
also found
more
that basic. Mhm.
I think the more knowledge you have of your own vehicle so that you can do certain repairs on it, the better if you're planning on doing regular off or any off-roading for that matter,
Yeah.
where you're going to be in the bush for a week or two or whatever. So if something happens, you don't always have to wait for help. You can do some things yourself. But I think the key is there. What do you take? Because again, like the medical equipment and anything else, I suppose, you can end up needing a trailer just for space. If you really
Yeah.
overcook this, you could sort of carry a spare engine in a Venter trailer behind you if you really want to. So I think
Yeah.
these are things that you need to think about very carefully before you do stuff like this, and plan and talk to people who know, so that you can get ideas. And I think belonging to all these 4x4 clubs and so on, because there's obviously people on there who are incredibly experienced, and you can always learn from them.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's like anything where, especially first trips and stuff, learning or going with more experienced people is useful. And also sometimes thinking about what are the things that can go wrong. We had a thing now where um, the, the the one guy, as I said, he was towing a trailer, like a bush trailer, and uh, one of the bolts that connect the suspension sheared off. And then he had to replace it. Fortunately, he had bolts and stuff, but of course now he doesn't have a 100% correct bolt. It doesn't have a high tensile steel one, whatever. So we could get out, but at least because he had that. But something like that could very quickly turn into a disaster. It's the little things that you don't think will break. So have stuff that can work for multiple repairs or whatever is quite necessary. Yeah.
Okay. For my final question, you've now completed this trip, and it sounds like you're at the time of your life, which I'm jealous of. Um, But that also means that you've had some real-time testing of stuff that you planned and kit, etc. So, and that's always there are always handy lessons in that. So, what are the biggest lessons that you brought home from this? Because I think one can always learn something. So, if somebody was prepping for their first serious overlanding or off-road adventure, what are some of the key things you think they need to focus on before they hit the road?
Um, yeah, that is a issue. Like I said earlier, I think the thing for me when I learned most is, geez, I can take a lot more comfortable stuff if I'm in a vehicle than on foot. But uh, yeah, it's sometimes it's the little things like what makes life better. Something like a ground sheet, or and I can you can use that for multiple things. Um, uh, Maybe what cooking equipment am I carrying? Do I need more or can I get away with less? Um, it's sometimes useful, sorry, to pre-plan meals. Like it's easy if you're just one or two people and you can buy quick things and expensive stuff and so on. But let's say you're catering for a whole family, so pre-cooked meals that are frozen and kept in you can keep it in your fridge in the vehicle, for instance. So all these things make life a lot easier. I think in terms of, I already mentioned now that bolt that snapped off that bush trailer. And for me, for instance, suddenly I don't really have a lot of bolts and fasteners with me. So immediately I thought, okay, it is not something I've really thought of, that specific thing. So I tend to have things like extra, globes and so that I can keep the lights working, and an extra set of fan belts. And I've got all that sort of stuff in the vehicle because of just the mileage I normally do. And when I was like, oh, I haven't actually thought of that. So of course, now I'm going to add bolts to to the vehicle. So the vehicle's going to get even heavier.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it's interesting. You look at it and go, my word, yeah, it is something that is an issue. The other thing I think that was interesting there, for instance, is um, having a bigger, better jack, for instance, in the vehicle, because to push that suspension back into place and so forth, you actually need uh, better equipment. The little thing that's in your bucky or whatever doesn't necessarily work. So I already carry a bigger jack in my vehicle, but if you now start towing big trailers and things like that, you might need additional equipment. So it's not, don't always just count on the stuff that came with the vehicle for that. I think look what's available, ask people, get advice, and listen to stories as well, because you hear from the stories that, oh, we had this happen, we had that happening. Okay, I should have that. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, great. For the viewers, if you like this episode, please do the regular thing and click the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Please help us grow and become more visible. And remember to smash that bell icon so that you can get notifications of new videos coming out. Stay up front with that. And if you are interested in any of the training offered under the Lone Operator and Fortis programs, there is always a link in the description below. Check it out. And we look forward to meeting you on a range one of these days. Bolt, thank you so much for joining me so early in the morning. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Rian. It was nice to be with you again.
Welcome back to the real world.
Damn it.